And welcome everyone to our next Practices Live session with Dr. Dorothy Okello. We're very excited to have her. If you had a chance to read her biography, she's Dean of the School of Engineering. She's a researcher in netLabs, Uganda. She is also the director of the Innovation Resilient Africa Network, all those at Makerere University, which is a well-regarded university. And as if she didn't have enough to do, she's also chairperson of the Uganda Communications Commission. So I wonder sometimes how the country runs when she's not there. She might get out around and everybody just shuts down when she's not there. But Dorothy, if I might be so familiar as to just simply call you by your first name, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Well, let's just jump right into it. People are really interested to know, what is Uganda doing in the space of telecommunications to deal with this pandemic? And if you want to focus just on the UCC, that's fine. But what's going on?
All right, thanks. So, Mark, actually, that's a very pertinent question you ask. I think if I may give a bit of context to this, already the ICT or the telecom sector has been identified nationally as one of the key priorities for the country. So we were already doing quite a bit in terms of our digital transformation as a country. So here comes this pandemic, which then forces us essentially to stay home, because the best practice, at least for us in Uganda, we believe that the best practice is the lockdown. Okay, so our schools got shut down even before we had any cases in the country, and now we're on a total lockdown. Everyone is staying at home and keeping safe. And so what has that meant? That has meant that actually the role of the telecom sector has become even more significant to what we are doing as a country. So bringing it back home to what UCC is doing. First of all, we did already have a business continuity plan in place. And I have to say this, when you're reviewing these documents and these policies and thinking of worst case scenarios, you don't think it's going to happen next week or next month. Yeah, that is the real honest truth. But thank God we had it. So the first thing we did was building off that as UCC was then to develop a pandemic response plan based on the business continuity plan, so that we can have a specialized process of how we shall run as UCC. The next was constituting a pandemic response team. And this involves really from the board through management and through the team. As a country, thankfully, telecommunications has been identified as one of the essential services. So that has meant that we are then internally, as UCC, and we've also encouraged the operators in the sector to identify who are the essential workers within their respective operations, so that actually the telecom sector or the ICT sector more generally continues to function as best as we can. More significantly, given the role that we are playing in enabling business all over the country to continue, and our international engagements. So we have at an operational level, the management team, for example, has been constituted as our pandemic, top-level pandemic response team. And we have also identified the essential services. So we have some UCC staff who must get into office. They must be there physically. And we have others that are working remotely. As a country, stickers have been provided to enable movement of staff depending on how essential you have been deemed by the country. So some of these stickers will allow you to move strictly between the non-curfew hours, because in Uganda we also have a curfew that starts at 7 p.m. and runs up to 6:30 in the morning. And so we've been able really to categorize who's who and get that done. And then within our response as UCC, we have also singled out our IT services, because essentially that is what we need to get going. That's how everybody is running right now, essentially. And so it's also critically important that as we have our plan in place, the strategies have kicked in and all, we have the teams in place, we are also critically monitoring our IT systems and services to ensure that that is running as we expect it to be. Thank you. So that's what UCC is doing.
That sounds like a lot. So I'm impressed that you had a plan in place. I don't think very many people did. Is there someone that might be able to share a copy of that if it's in writing that we could let other people see? It's too late for them to construct a plan, but they might find yours as a useful guide.
Yes, I can work with the management team, and we come up with a document that we can share publicly.
Okay,
Yeah, and
excellent. Well,
share our
thank you so
experiences.
much.
Because they would be happy to do that. Because really, like I said, when you're doing some of these documents, you don't think you need them, all right?
Yeah,
Or you hope you need them during your term, and lo and behold, we did need ours.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you were ready, but sorry that you had to put it in place. So tell me, you said that there's a lot of monitoring that you do of how telecommunications is performing in the country. Describe to us the types of things you're monitoring, how that's determined, how that is shared, and how you have discussions with the relevant stakeholders.
Okay. So one of the things is that at a national level, we have the National COVID Task Force that is right at the presidential level. And then the Ministry of Health, who's really steering our activities at that front. And then we have security. So because of the role of the ICT sector, even prior to this, the significance that it had for our nation, we are actually plugged into all those spaces. But let me first start with what we are doing on the side with the customers. Because one of the things that has happened, and I'm sure it has happened world over, but I know in Uganda, in terms of where there was access before, we have more people complaining in terms of the quality of service and everything, simply because if you look at, say, residential areas, the utilization, the usage has gone up by 50%. So things we have been doing is, first of all, our complaint center is open and very available. People can access it online so that we are monitoring what is happening in terms of the service delivery, because this is how people are getting back and forth. So also our customer service or customer care operations are fully available. This is also something we are following up with the operators so that customer needs, customer issues can really reach where they need to be and can be addressed. Granted that the volume has increased, so that is one thing. So that's on the customer side. On the government and the industry side, and what some of the things, one is we quickly had to take some regulatory decisions. So number one is that we granted temporary authorization of the code 919 to be used specifically for COVID-related issues. So that already there is some filtering in terms of the calls coming in. So that's one thing that was quickly done. The other thing, and I know that has been a global issue, is fake news and also false advertising. And so we've put out advisories about this and what it's like and what are the penalties related to that. More to that, we have actually gone ahead to establish a fact checker service, which was only launched, I believe, on 11 of April in response. So that because there's so much going out there, and as much as the different government bodies have been doing their best to get information out, I mean, this thing has hit everybody and, very quickly. So having a fact checker can also allow individuals to see information and have a place to, dump the text they've seen or what they've heard and get feedback on, is this really correct or is it not correct? The other thing that we have had to do is sometime back we had banned what we call, okay, we call them bizindalo in the local language, but this is basically using a megaphone or that microphone with a loudspeaker and going out there and talking or spreading a message out there, because that wasn't radio, that was, so basically like public speaking, but out there. So that had been actually banned. But because of the pandemic and the need to really get information out, this is one of the services that have been temporarily authorized to happen. And so we have community leaders therefore able to, via a public address system, be able to address their communities and share information really, really quickly. Also, we have shared advisory with the broadcasters, and we're very closely monitoring to ensure that information that is shared via these platforms does not in any way generate false hope or give information that is contrary to the government directives. And I really do have to thank our president for this. He has been very alive on this, very present on this, having addresses on a very regular basis and guiding the nation step by step what we need to be doing. Okay, but everything, we're mindful that everything is happening very quickly. That's also true, but because things are happening very quickly, it's also very possible that rumors and misinterpretations and, you know, the need for clarification is very important. But this is where also the broadcasters have a major role in ensuring that really whatever they put out there is correct, is factual, and helps us as a country fight against COVID-19. Yeah. So those are some of the issues that we are addressing. Of course, on the side of industry as well, there are big issues around the congestion that they are witnessing within their networks. And so also permitting them to remodel the data and voice traffic as they can. And so, for example, permitting promotional fares that may encourage more voice traffic, for example, to be had during the night if it doesn't really have to be during the day. So I think one of the things that we have learned through this period, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it changes the course of regulation going forward, is you have to take decisions, and you have to take decisions really quickly. Just simply in terms of the kind of engagement we as the board and the management are having, the trend in terms of the amount of interaction we've been having now around different decisions has really stepped up relative to, you know, the kind of engagements we were having between the board and management before this crisis came about, the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, the leadership challenges must be immense of working distance from everyone, but in this very dynamic environment, deciding fast while still involving everyone in decision making. Hats off to you for being able to do that. Let me move to a different topic in that space. And we see for a lot of telecom companies around the world that they're struggling financially through this because customers aren't able to pay their bills, and the companies in some instances are working very hard to connect new customers that are stuck at home. What's that like in Uganda? What's the financial conditions, and how do you monitor that so that you're abreast of how these companies are performing?
I think one of the things that we are looking at is, one, how can they best optimize their networks?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a big issue, and that we can try to look at in that way. The other thing that we are looking at is which are the critical services and what must we make sure are available at all times. Now, yes, in some cases, quality may suffer here and there, and there may also be certain implications downstream back to the industry. But I think one of the things, and we're very fortunate therefore, because telecom services were identified as essential services, there is greater room for them to engage and operate, and for us to interface and monitor what's going on literally on a day-by-day basis than other sectors. For example, the hotel services and other sectors which were not designated the way that we are. So I think credit to the government policy, number one, in terms of identifying telecom as an essential service, and therefore we, as the regulator of the service, we have to work very hard to make sure that that service remains in place, but that they can remain financially viable. Yes, we do have some operators who are struggling, but the closeness between ourselves, okay, so let me say, not myself as the board, that would be between management and the teams. We are really pushing for that so that beyond this crisis, we actually come out stronger than we are right now.
Okay, so we had an email come in that has a few questions on it. I'd like to start asking some of them. I still have questions, but it's now time for for our participants to ask some. So this person submitted some via email. Let me ask one of those. What advice would you give Ugandans with respect to technical security and the security with their technologies? Now that they're using these technologies at home more than ever, what kind of advice would you have for them?
That's a very good question. One, please make sure that all your apps and software packages and everything is up to date, because security is a big issue right now. Secondly, and I can see, including some of my students here, please, if you can avoid being online, please be offline if you can. Because then you're creating space for people who must be online to use that. And then, so let's spread out where we can. That is number two. Number three, there's a lot of fraud going on, right? So there are people calling in and saying, oh, well, you haven't paid up this, you haven't done that, your phone services are going to be interrupted, or things of that nature. Interestingly, I received one of those calls myself. So I'm speaking from personal experience. Everything, all the changes that are being made, we are announcing them. So if you haven't had anything from the official channels, please ignore that. If you can't go the extra step, let's get these numbers in so we start tracking who these fraudsters are. But please, communication will come out officially, and that is what is very important for Ugandans to do. The other thing is, of course, I have seen, for example, there's been restructuring of the loans processes by banks, and different measures are being done in other spaces. I think, for example, in the water sector, they won't be delivering the bills and all that. And I think some people in our sector too might be hard pressed in terms of their needs for communication. But what I would like to encourage is that where people can be up to speed with their payments, please be up to speed with your payments, because the services do need finances, do need HR to work. And so where we can, let's do our bit by ensuring we do our contribute and pay up where we have to pay up, or be good people where we have to be good people, so that all of us can get through this safely. So those are some of the areas that I'll say. But most importantly, be up to speed with your applications and keep good practices. Zoom, for example, is being used a lot, and we already have good practices even being circulated by government in terms of how people should set up their Zoom meetings. So, for example, get people to register. Okay, so you know who's coming in. Don't share your passwords online, because I've also experienced a Zoom bomb myself. It's not fun at all. The only thing is that because I was aware, the moment I had some chitter chatter happening in the background, I immediately turned around my phone. And but what people had to look at was not fun at all. So unfortunately, as we're all here trying to do, okay, we believe and we're really genuinely trying to do good, there are people out there taking advantage of this. So let's please be mindful about that as well.
All right, we have a question on the chat box about the fees that the operators pay. We see in some countries where the operators are struggling financially, that in some instances the regulator, the government, is waiving or lowering license fees to help out. In other situations, we've seen governments actually raise those fees because the government feels that it has a financial problem. What's happening in Uganda?
In Uganda, we have not changed our fees, so we've neither increased, neither lowered. So what we have done is that we have encouraged the operators to come and we have discussions at a bilateral level. Because for some of them, their licenses were already due before this, so that is one category. There are some whose were due within this period. So different operators will have different circumstances. So for now, we are not making any changes to the license fees that are due. And just like the banks have done in terms of people who have taken out loans and all, calling them in and saying, okay, let's discuss this, because you know that avenue has been opened up. So there are things we can do on a one-on-one with our operators. Yeah.
Well, just listening to you talk and having spoken with other people around the world, adaptability seems to be key here. of talking with people, working in a cooperative environment, as opposed to the more kind of oppositional environment that regulation typically is, seems to be really important. One question that someone has in the box as well, they actually have two questions. One you've already answered, but it has to do with, are you experiencing some network congestion? And you said that you are. They also asked the question about radio spectrum. We do see some countries, the US being one of those, where the regulator has made additional radio spectrum available to certain companies on an emergency basis. What is the status of any of that in Uganda?
Yes, that's a very good question, and one that we are actually looking at. And part of our monitoring that we are doing is exactly looking at the congestion and what are our different options around that. And for example, is it nationwide? Are we having particular hotspots? So that we are well guided in terms of how we move forward. So some of the initiatives, like I have already mentioned, because we think that spectrum, yes, is one of many options. So one of it is that, can we encourage people to shift out of the busy time, okay? Mm-hmm. Because that is something that can be done. All the way looking at, okay, if we have to make temporary spectrum licenses available, what form and nature would that take, and what would be the terms and conditions around that? So definitely, like the other regulators, spectrum is an area that we are looking at to come into the mix if we have to go that route, yeah.
One of the questions in the email we received earlier has to do with the technology and its use in helping combat the virus. Are the things, and the question is, are the things that you would like to see the technology sector, and that'd be not just telecommunications, but I think probably also what we call the edge providers, are the things you would like to see them do that they're not doing that would help with the, help contain and deal with the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and here I always like to start with selfish interest. So I'll go ahead and do that. I think there are certain services, for example, in the education sector, where we could maybe do more around either zero rating or making it more affordable for homeschooling and or people studying away from campuses to work. That is just one area that I would like to see us do more. But also on the other hand, for the universities, and it's easy for me to give examples from there because that's where I come from, in terms of how are we actually rolling out e-learning? Because some universities like my own, we do have a open distance and e-learning policy, but what are we going to be doing either through this period now or beyond to make those opportunities more available? We have the way it is structured in Uganda now, because movement has really been curtailed. But if there are emergency services related with medical issues, for example, you have to get authorization from the political head in a district. Now, access to that is not as easy for everyone. So how could technology come in to support access in such services and improve those authorizations so that people, if they don't, people may actually not need to go out to these particular offices to get the services that they need. I saw an interesting discussion as I was reflecting for and preparing for this. Is what about our blood donation services that we run on a regular basis? How can we set it up? Because the blood donors are known and can be identified. How are we setting this up so that we can support blood donation services to continue in a safe space with people still at home, but we are supporting identification and also collection services and things like that. So I think that, and it's really my hope that through this process, we shall actually see that the ICT sector, being one of the key 4 pillars of our country, is not wrongly placed, and that not only people that love technology like ourselves will see that, but everyone will come to that realization. The way that mobile money, people really appreciate mobile money, even before now, and we can see its value. So I think there's quite a bit that can be done in that space, and my hope is that there will be more drive from the non-ICT sectors or the non-engineering sectors being more of drivers in terms of, hey, how can we do more together using technology as a platform?
So you talked a lot about the cooperation and the things that you would like to see people do. So we've had a couple of questions that I want to combine that are in that space. One of them has to do with any kind of financial assistance for people who are struggling to pay their bills. Are there, right now that appears to be something you're working on cooperatively, do you see that potentially being a mandate? Then related to that, one of the people in the chat is concerned that what if customers aren't getting all the data that they're paying for? Is the UCC doing any monitoring of making sure that the billing is correct?
Yes, I will start with the last one. Yes, we have received actually complaints in that regard. So we are doing that monitoring to see what's happening around that and what should we therefore be doing. There is also, of course, the other aspect to it that because we're all home, say like the bundle that I used to get, even with the kids being home on holiday, it could maybe stretch a week. You know, now it's doing 2-3 days and you're like, hey, wait a minute, what happened to my bundle? I just have to stop back and then think of all the Zoom meetings I had in the course of today. I think this is my 5th meeting today. Then I'm like, okay, all right, I understand. So there is what's actually happening because people are doing more, but then there is also whether there's something not right in terms of really the computations of people, what they're paying for and what they are receiving. So we need to look at both those situations. In terms of payments, for people not able to pay for the telecom services, we haven't really done anything in that area, I would say, unless management has been looking at it and it's yet to come to the level of the board. But this I'm really thinking personally, this is not something I've engaged with management on that, but looking at what is happening with the other sectors, whether you look at power or whether you look at the electricity bills or whether you're looking at the water bills, the approach has been that, okay, you will, whatever you consume, you will still be accountable for. We're only going to be soft on, okay, you don't need to pay it now, because ordinarily if you don't pay your water bill within a few days, they'll cut you off. Even if it's over the weekend, they'll cut you off. But now there's no discontinuation of services because people haven't paid. So people will still owe the money for the services they've consumed, but they can continue to use that. So my thinking is that as a first step in terms of, well, if management came back to me, I would be looking similarly to see, could we apply such a model also to the telecom sector? Because really at the end of the day, those monies are needed to provide the service. So I think that's where the balancing act will need to come from in terms of the service delivery we want to have, but also people's ability to pay. And even if it's not an issue that has come up now, it's one that is likely to arise because coming out of this, our industry has really, our economy has been impacted. So just because we get out of the lockdown on 5th of May, if that's when it actually happens, doesn't mean that people will immediately be able to pay. I have seen one of our private universities, I've seen also one of our big hotels already communicate to their staff that they're going to remodel the salary structure, you know, how much money they can expect to get per month or things like that. So people's ability to pay is not going to resume on 6th of May simply because lockdown hopefully would have ended by then. So this is an issue that's likely to stay with us for some time in terms of what we need to address.
All right, well, thank you very much. So there's still a lot of questions in the chat, but I think it's time for us to open up so that people can ask their questions directly or just make comments and get advice from each other. So Rebecca, I'm going to turn the management over to you. I'm thinking people, if they have questions that we've not gotten to, they can raise their hand and ask them, but I'll leave it to you to manage that.
Sure, and I do actually have someone lined up already who's going to share a little bit as an analyst from South Africa. For those of you, though, who would like to participate now when we begin the sharing portion, what you'll do is if you go to the participant bar For those of you using a PC or computer, that's along the bottom portion of the video feed. For those of you that might be on a phone or an iPad, that's going to be on the top part of your screen. So you'll just select that participant box, and then you have an option to raise your hand on the right-hand side. But I am going to go ahead, and I was chatting just a little bit with Charlie Lewis, is an analyst in South Africa. Mark, you might remember him.
I do
Charlie,
remember Charlie.
I'm going to unmute your audio, Charlie. And if you like, you are welcome to share your video. Are you there, Charlie?
I am indeed, yes. Thank you, Rebecca. I'll keep the video off if you don't mind, just to save a bit of bandwidth. There's a lot of emerging, useful, international, global best practice, which is quite useful. And I think Dorothy's touched on quite a lot of it already. In South Africa in particular, we've had demands from operators for additional spectrum, and the regulators moved ahead with the process to do that. Has something like 35 applications from people wanting additional spectrum in certain high demand bands, and hopefully we'll move very expeditiously ahead with that. They've also had requests for fee waivers on spectrum fees. Dorothy touched on that issue as well. And the regulators agreed to hold off spectrum fees for a period of 3 months. We're also moving quite strongly in the track and trace area, but that's a particular problem because obviously there's a set of privacy issues, and there's a lot of difficulty balancing the need to track COVID-19, track the spread, at the same time protect the privacy of consumers. Similarly, we've moved ahead with zero rating, but unfortunately in a very patchwork fashion. And zero rating is actually quite much more of a challenge than people seem to think it is, because so many websites today pull in content from all over the web. And so you might zero rate one particular IP address, and then a lot of data that gets pulled in from elsewhere is not zero rated, which can create a mess. We have numbering people have been active. We created a special number for emergency COVID-19 calls, a 111 number that's been created. And finally, something quite interesting that's been done, this issue I've been personally banging on for a long time, is the operators are now required to send public service SMSs. I get from my service provider, my mobile, daily an SMS reminder about the fact that we're in lockdown, about the need to sanitize, the need to stay home, etc., etc. I think that's very useful. So there's a lot of emerging international good practice, and I think it would be very useful. Perhaps Mark could work on something like this to try and kind of document and put together the learnings of the emerging and unfolding process that as regulators, we're often flying by the seat of our pants dealing with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. We are archiving everything that is being talked about in these webinars, and our attempt is to develop kind of lessons learned. I don't know if we can come up with best practices. That's maybe too high of a reach when we're all learning as we go along. But certainly, here's what people have tried, and here's what the experiences have been. We have aspirations of doing that. If you could contribute to that work, please do so. Rebecca, back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to Abubakar. I'm going to unmute your audio. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Hello, Dorothy.
Hello.
Yeah, I just had one quick one, a question on the remote areas and the islands and the highlands. How is UCC enabling network operators to try to reach those hard to reach areas in the country? Because in the developed world, at least every home is connected. But now in some of the places in Uganda, probably not everywhere we have coverage. There are some remote habitations that are probably not well covered, and probably we need to ensure that they receive communication, because one of the global goals is to ensure that communication is for all. Thank you.
Yes, Abubakar, that is a very valid point. And I think one of the things we have learned through this period is what has been the role of RCDF, that's our Rural Communications Development Fund for universal access services, and what more should we be doing? Because some of these areas, as you rightly mentioned, were having challenges even before now, okay? And now the problem has been aggravated, if you will, during this period, because of course lockdown found some people in those spaces. So maybe on an ordinary day, or maybe they go there for Christmas, it wasn't such a big deal. Now the calls are coming in from there that on this side, I can't really do anything. But so one of the things that we shall be looking at is, one, how has what we have done under RCDF enabled communication from even hard to reach spaces, and what more should we be doing given the experience of this? Yeah, because also if you take this another level and say, I think one of the things we have learned from this is that there is going to be more appetite for working from home, okay, or working out of office. And I could stretch that to working, say, from my country home or our rural areas or things like that. So the urgency or the need for connectivity across the country, I think, is going to be highlighted even more during this. Maybe one other thing that now that I'm speaking, that I wanted to say based on what Charlie shared, and thank you so much for that contribution, is really to give kudos also to the telecom operators in Uganda as well for the public service announcements they've been giving. You call a number, you hear a message first that is guiding you and all that. You get the SMSs and everything. I think that has been a really great service in terms of getting word out and getting it out quickly and on a regular basis to remind people about what we need to be doing.
All right, thanks, Dorothy. Next, we have Azabo Baron. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you so much. My question goes to Dr. Dorothy. Dr. Dorothy, I'm concerned with the speed of internet connectivity. Most of the time, I see like Airtel has been bragging around of having over 2,000 masks, but the speed isn't changing. I don't know whether we're on 4G or we're on 2G. And the second question goes back to Dr. Dorothy. What is the harmonization between the National Council for Higher Education and the Uganda Curriculum Development Center? Because we are getting into developing solutions for e-learning, but our fear is that the Ministry of Education probably is not ready to incorporate e-learning into our education system. How ready is the Ministry of Education, and so that we, the innovators, can take on a very urgent position in that? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ezabo, for that question. One, I did say, yes, we're having challenges with around congestion. So people will definitely, we're getting complaints around that. People not getting the speeds that they have been used to getting. So that's something that we're looking at and trying to see which different strategies we can have in place to address that. One, from asking people to move out of the busy times, allow that to happen, all the way through to looking at opportunities around spectrum. What more could we be doing around that? So yes, and I apologize for that on behalf of the sector that, you know, given the way that we're all at home, our residential areas are picking up much more traffic than they were in the past. So that's just one of the things. To the second question that you raised, I don't know that I can speak on behalf of the Ministry of Education and all the bodies that you mentioned, the National Council for Higher Education or the NCDC would fall under that. So I don't feel I can speak about that authoritatively. The only thing I can speak about is given my personal experience as being from Makerere University and the area of education. But I have to say, I think the Honorable Minister herself, when she spoke and gave guidelines to the sector, in addition to giving the timeline, which we can't follow anymore since the lockdown was extended, she did share some strategies in terms of how we may reach out to the rural communities. Of course, there was also handwritten material, print written material that will be shared, but where people can have the e-learning opportunities, that was also encouraged. Maybe for those from Uganda on the call, also the Ministry of ICT has just released a call looking for digital solutions. And one of the areas that has been highlighted is in education. So I'd really want to encourage innovators who are on this, whether you have an idea, but better yet, whether you have an advanced solution or idea that some solution that you've been working on that you want to promote out there, please take advantage of this opportunity to participate in this call. It has a very short timeline, as most calls related to COVID do have. So please take advantage of that as well. And the information is on the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance website, if you haven't already received it via the several WhatsApp groups.
All right, and next we have Imran, who's one of our alumni of our flagship Perk Bank 2-week program. He's talking to us from Pakistan. One moment here. Are you there, Imran?
I think he's still muted.
Yeah.
Hi, Imran.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Mark, how are you?
Doing great, thank you.
My question, it's thought for everyone. So COVID-19 has put us in social distancing, but the telecoms, the ICTs are bringing us closer socially. So they are binding us. So my question, my thoughts are on that the people, those who are fighting on the front line, doctors, paramedics, what telecoms are thinking about incentivizing them, giving them special packages, or the hospitals that they can perform much better because everybody is financially tight. So what are the thoughts on this? And is there any practice around the world being done on this?
Dorothy, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, I like the suggestion that has been put forward because I think one thing all of us globally are trying to do is how we can be more supportive to our health sector, who are the front line in keeping us all safe. I'm not aware that we're doing anything in a particular from the telecom sector, but it's certainly a suggestion that I'll take away from this event.
Yeah, Imran, I know in the US just a few days ago, AT&T announced that it was going to be providing 3 months of free service for medical professionals. And they had an easy way of doing it because they had special services for them. I don't know exactly how that works, but for them, it was easy to identify. And that's probably one of the challenges any place in the world is, who is this medical professional that you'd be trying to help out?
All right, and then next we have Ann Rita. She's with ITU. Are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Dorothy, nice to see you after a very long time.
I know. Hi, Ann Rita.
Very good stuff, very good stuff. I had a question or comments around a couple of things on tools for surveillance. I think this is something that we may have to consider as, regulators should consider, given that of the mobile coverage in Africa, most of the countries have about 90% coverage, and maybe use of technologies could be used. It may not be a solution now, but moving forward, there may need to be some investment in mobile technologies as a tool for surveillance, notwithstanding the issues of privacy. Then I had a question on coordination with other sectors, especially the energy sector. Most of our people who are mobile users always have to go elsewhere to charge their phones and to be able to connect. And now they're locked down at home. So many people don't have access just because they don't have ways of charging their phones. There could be something to look at around that area. Then the third issue I had was the social welfare issues surrounding the lockdown. As you know, with the lockdown, there's been so much gender-based violence, domestic violence, and issues to do with mental health. I know UCC's concern is about ICT access, but because now ICT or phones are the only means of communication, is there provisions for the regulators to provide additional access or support towards the addressing some of those social economic welfare support requirements on, for instance, free access to a phone so that people can call in, or free access to information to do with mental health, among others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anrita and Mark. I'm really looking forward to the summary captured from this session, because those are all very valid points that Anrita has mentioned. At least I know on the news back home, and I think they do say it's a global trend. There are two issues that are coming out of this. One is domestic violence. The percentages of this is going up. I think on one of the newscasts yesterday, they were saying in Uganda, the reports are going up by 25%. That's a very, very high figure. So the other is around mental health. Because of having to be in this kind of setting, there's also a lot of fear and things of that nature. So these are all areas that we need to look into and see what more could we be doing to support. And again, I really, especially for those in Uganda, want to flag the call that has gone out for digital solutions. If you have any ideas or applications that can help us to use technology to address this kind of issues, please come forward. Energy is a big, big issue, because as you have rightly shared, a number of people have to go out or would have to go out of their homes actually for charging. So I think for people in sectors such as ours, sometimes we feel like, oh, there are phones everywhere and, you know, work is done. I think this in a way has come to show us where the big, big challenges still remain. Even in simple things like, yes, the network is in place. It may be 2G, 4G, or even 5G with all the issues it has raised out there. But of what use is it if I can't charge it? Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, Ram, are you there? Hey, Ram.
Oh, yes. Hey, hi. Hello, I just have, one very simple questions. I have two SIM. We have 4 operators, telecom operators, but 2 are very active, and they are actually competing each other for providing multiple benefits. This has created a kind of, congestion in network. So what would be the role of regulator? Because, how can regulator intervene to ease the, this traffic congestion thing? Regarding the COVID thing, I think this announcement has been made. I think this is everywhere, as Dorothy also very clearly mentioned about this the PSA thing. But my only concern is, how do we actually, how can we control the unethical competition? So what would be the role of regulator there?
Okay. Yes, Ram, that's a very valid point, and I did see in the chat someone else has raised that issue. That is why it's very important for us to keep with our monitoring, and I really do have to say we have very close engagement with the operators as well. But unfortunately, even in good time, even in hard times like this, when we think we're all moving one way, there are also people doing other things. So this is why the regulators need to be on their feet on this. And even in such times, and being on your feet, but really, really quickly, because you think that you are moving in one way, we're all moving in one direction, we want to keep safe, and then people are coming up with strategies which are, taking you backwards instead of taking you forward. So there's no sleeping for the regulators. But maybe, Mark, this is something that I don't know if you have experiences to share from other countries and how they are looking into this and what they are already doing about it.
I don't have any information on that, but we'll check and see what we can find, though. So, Rebecca, I have 2 more questions myself. If we have another person or 2 with their hands up, why don't we get them, and then I'll ask those.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll take, I believe, Mr. Gay, he's with the Islamic Development Bank. So we'll go ahead and take his last question here, and then we'll turn things over to you. Mr. Gay, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. This question is for Dorothy. It has to do with privacy issues. I know there are some countries that have put in place some surveillance to monitor cases in terms of individuals. So I'm just wondering, in the event that the government of Uganda is thinking of doing some surveillance to monitor incidents of coronavirus, does the regulatory framework of Uganda have in place privacy protection provisions to protect consumers in terms of their information? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. That's a very important question, and one that is personally very close to me in terms of privacy and data protection. Now, we do have laws around that, and so it's just to make sure that in our speed to fight against COVID-19, we're not violating that. And this is where I think for me the bigger worry is that while we're trying to do good, we should make sure that some basic principles around, for example, privacy being one of those big ones, is that we take really good care about it. Because surveillance that's one of the strategies in terms of fighting of the disease. I think the other thing, and this is, I am speaking just as me, like anything else, surveillance can also be misused beyond the privacy issue. So we need to make sure that as we are putting in these places for tracing of contacts and really understanding the community spread where it may have already happened with relation to the spread of the COVID-19 disease, that really we are very mindful of our basic human rights, because those haven't changed because we are now in COVID-19 times.
All right, so I have two questions. One is actually in our chat box. This is from Sama Nwanma. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. It's referring to the social media tax. For those of you that are not familiar with it, in Uganda, the government imposed a tax on data for certain social media, I think social media outside of Uganda, in hopes that the social media companies would pick up that tax. But that hasn't happened too much. So it's the citizens who are paying it. Our questioner is asking about, is this being an extra burden on the poor, especially at this time? And if so, if there are any thoughts about providing some special considerations for the poor with this respect to the social media tax?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have the social media tax in Uganda, and for those familiar with it, it's the OTT. There have been issues raised around it as to whether it should be scrapped during this time. To be honest, I haven't seen anything yet moving in that direction. That said, it is not entirely a UCC issue, so there could be discussions outside of UCC around that space. But I think generally our approach as a country is not to cancel what is due, but to see how else we can manage the situation. Yeah, but really I have to say that is speaking as me, because I have not seen any discussions about making a change to OTT. If it gets announced this evening, please take it in that context. And I'm only telling you what I know as of now.
Yeah. So if something wonderful happens, we'll give you full credit.
Oh, please don't. I want this happen.
So
yeah, but it is certainly an issue that has been raised, yes.
So one last question from me. You've talked about how the regulator is adapting in Uganda, how the operators are. Just looking forward 2 years, what do you see as how this pandemic has changed the industry in Uganda and how it would have changed the regulator?
Okay. I think one thing that has happened out of this is the appreciation of the role of ICT in our day-to-day, beyond the social spaces, because people have been on Facebook and all these things and all that, but I think the role that we can play. So which means that post this, I would expect that there's going to actually be an increase in terms of our utilization of services and also new products coming out, for example, Ezabo earlier was talking about e-learning. I'm sure all universities right now, and I speak for universities because that's where I am, but I'm sure even other institutions are looking at beyond this, how do we have more maybe blended learning and all that. So that means that there's going to be an increase in terms of the demand of our networks. How ready are we to grow with that? How ready are we to innovate around, and I like the work that Affordable Internet for Access is doing around the A4AI, meaningful internet access. I think that is where we're also going to be spending a lot of our time thinking. The other issue has come out around energy, okay? Because yes, if I want, now I have discovered I can work from home, okay? How reliable is my energy supply from where I'm at home? So I see that, number one, the demand, definitely that's going to step up, and that has implications both for the operators who have to supply these services, and also on the regulation in terms of how we make these available and how we manage that we have only ethical practices to the best that we can. So that is one. The other that I think will come out of this is how we support as regulators rapid innovation within the sector. Now, as UCC, we've already been looking at the concept of regulatory sandboxes, and we've got policies that we are working on around this. I can see more speed towards that because the kind of speed we have had to engage with issues now, I don't think that's going away, right? It may not stay at this high peak, but I can see that there's going to be a lot of innovation happening in the sector. And so we as the regulators will also need to move faster. And there's also going to be a lot of experimentation, because even now there's a lot of experimentation happening. If we can relate it, for example, to what is happening in the field of medicine, looking at how do you shrink the time between when you start working on a drug and when that drug gets onto the market. So the kind of thing that they're looking at shortening that time, those are the same kind of issues that we are looking at. And then lastly is around what our universal service funds, or in Uganda, what we more commonly have as the Rural Communications Development Fund. What kind of initiatives should we be looking at so that in going forward, we actually enable people to work from where they would prefer to be, not where they have to be?
All right.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Dorothy. We appreciate everything that you shared, taking your time to do it, being on your 5th Zoom call today. I think that was the number you used. I've always been impressed. I've known you for a few years. I've always been impressed with your ability to think strategically, act pragmatically, and communicate so clearly and so well. And you've not disappointed. You provided all of that here. So thank you, and thank you to all the participants.